Hi Psych class, welcome to video number 2 for Unit 3A on learning. Don't forget about classical conditioning, it's still a theory of learning, but now we are going to move into operant conditioning. And so, remember that this is just another way to explain learning. It's still a form of associative learning like classical conditioning was, but this time we're going to say that people learn because of the results of one's actions. And so this may seem like common sense, but there were psychologists that had to discover this. So the examples are most people that have learned a lesson will increase an action if it's followed by a reinforcer and will decrease an action if it's followed by a punisher. And so we'll talk about those two things as well. An example is going to be a Skinner box. B.F. Skinner was one of the psychologists that came up with this theory of operant conditioning. And so he can actually teach animals like pigeons to like press buttons and do things for him. And so we'll actually watch a video in class that shows you an example of that. Alright, so we talked about reinforcers and punishers, so we should get the vocab down. A reinforcement is just a process by which a stimulus increases the chances of a behavior happening again. And so primary reinforcers and secondary reinforcers are two new words that you'll need to know. A primary reinforcer functions due to the biological makeup of a person. Basically, you don't have to teach a person to desire a primary reinforcer, while secondary reinforcers are going to function due to the value given when paired with a primary reinforcer. So in other words, think of primary reinforcers as unlearned reinforcers and secondary reinforcers as learned reinforcers. So let's do an example. Did you have this at your elementary school? Book It. It was sponsored by Pizza Hut. Like, hey, let's get little kids to read books and we'll bribe them with pizza. So if you went to a cool elementary school that had that, you may remember it. And even if you didn't, you can still answer the example. Alright, so here's how it worked. You read some books, your teacher graded your little book report, and then he or she would put a sticker next to your name on the Book It sticker chart. And so the Book It sticker chart was an example of, what do you think, primary or secondary? If you said secondary, you are correct. Secondary reinforcer. You had to learn the value, and here was the value that you learned. Your teacher told you, hey, earn so many stickers on the sticker chart by your name, and I will give you a coupon valid at any local Pizza Hut for a free personal pan pizza. Amazing! The personal pan pizza was the primary reinforcer. Okay, but there's more. In addition to primary and secondary, we also need to talk about reinforcers as being positive and negative. A positive reinforcer increases behavior when it's applied, and negative increases frequency when it's removed. Alright, so think of positive as give, negative as take away. And again, we'll do examples in class tomorrow over all of this. But one thing to keep in mind, negative reinforcement is not the same thing as a punishment. Remember that punishments decrease behavior and reinforcers increase behavior. And so a punishment is going to just stop a behavior by applying something bad. And a negative reinforcement is different than that. Okay? And so I know that it's weird to think about punishments in terms of positive and negative, but a positive punishment stops the behavior by giving something bad. A negative punishment stops a behavior by taking something away that's good. And so, again, we'll do examples in class to help understand that. Now we can talk about why we, or how we apply our reinforcement on schedules. Obviously, continuous reinforcement's the easiest to understand, but in real life it's rarely used, and that's that reinforcement occurs every time a behavior happens. That's often unrealistic to reinforce a learner every time they do a behavior. And so we tend to focus on partial schedules of reinforcement, and so think the word partial just means some of the time. Of your partial reinforcement, there are some new words that you need to know. An interval is based on clock time, like the amount of time that elapses between reinforcements. while a ratio is based on a number of occurrences of the behavior. Don't be confused by the fact that time is being used in both definitions. It's being used in different ways. When we talk about interval and ratio, we can also talk about whether or not the partial schedule of reinforcement is fixed, which just means set, or if it's variable, which means that it's random. So let's take a look at some examples. Tell me if each one of these is a reinforcement based on fixed or variable, an interval or ratio. So all four examples, a slot machine, the bell at the end of class, drug test, set work, and book it, all are not continuous reinforcement. The learner is not reinforced every time a behavior occurs. And so we know it's a partial schedule. Now we just have to figure out what kind of partial schedule. And so a slot machine, right? Obviously the behavior that's being reinforced is to keep putting money in it and play it. And so why do people do this, right? Clearly you're not getting a jackpot every time you play, so it's not continuous reinforcement. And so is it fixed? Is it a set thing? No, obviously not, because gambling wouldn't be a problem if it was a known outcome. And so we know that it's going to have a V. Now, is it based on time or behavior? A slot machine is going to be a VR schedule because it's based on the number of occurrences of the behavior, i.e. slot machines just don't shoot out money because it's a specific time of the day. And that's what makes that one variable ratio. The bell at the end of class. Hey, whether you've learned something or not, that bell's going to ring at the same time every day, right? School would probably be great fun for teachers, maybe not so fun for students, if it was based on some sort of fixed ratio schedule, meaning that you had to pass some sort of exit test to be allowed to leave class. Goodness, I might not see some of you in psych. You might get stuck all the way back in an earlier math or English class, and you wouldn't be allowed to leave until you had completed the work. And so, fortunately for you, unfortunately for teachers, school runs on a fixed interval. Drug tests at work, to be effective, they usually have to work on a variable interval schedule, meaning that you do not know which day a drug test is going to be given. Obviously, drug tests, telling people like, hey, the fourth Tuesday, of every month is a drug test, isn't going to catch people and get them to do the desired behavior, which is to maintain a drug-free environment. And the book that we were talking about, that's your fixed ratio, right? Every 7 books, it's a fixed ratio, right? 7-to-1. 7 books read equals 1 free pizza. Lots more examples like that in class when you show up. Okay, so is this stuff real? Let's talk about applications of operant conditioning. Shaping is teaching a complex behavior by breaking it down into steps that can be reinforced. And so think about, swim lessons, for example. You don't just toss babies into the deep end of the pool. We start by floating, getting our faces wet, right? Baby steps that are, reinforced with praise or stickers or candy. And only then do we move on to add more in-depth things like actual swimming strokes or diving and things of that nature. Programmed learning is just the same thing, educational testing that's based on shaping. Like if you've ever taken some, like an online test that shuts off after so many questions, right? And that if it keeps going if it feels that you need help in a specific area, that would be an example of programmed learning. And school is filled with examples of operant conditioning, right? Detentions, rewards, the tickets for the hallway blitz. There's all different types of operant conditioning that we can find here at school. Okay,